Hello viewers, a good afternoon to you all. Well, Uganda, a country that has ratified the International Declaration of Human Rights. We have ratified the International Convention Against Torture, the Maputo Protocol on the Rights of Women, but also in our Constitution and entire Chapter 4, the Bill of Rights. All these are channeled around empowering and strengthening the issues around the rights of people. But also know that in 2006, an office in Kampala was opened for the United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights. But on a very unique turn of events, we saw a letter earlier on this month that declared that the mandate of this institution shall not be renewed on reasons that, civil society is now vibrant, the built capacity of domestic institutions to promote and strengthen the issues around human rights. But also later on, we shall discuss UPDF at 42. But for now, let's just begin with the aspect of human rights in this country. And to discuss this, I'm joined by a panel of distinguished citizens of this country. That is now my pleasure to introduce to you. And from my immediate left is Dr. Sarah Bireete, the Executive Director of Center for Constitutional Governance. Doctor, it's always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Sunday. Good afternoon, viewers.
All right, thank you. Next to our doctor is, I choose to call him Senior Counsel Edgar Tabaro, who is a political analyst, and we also know that he does some work for Uganda in Khartoum.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, viewers.
Yeah.
I insist I'm senior. I'm senior in the profession.
Yes.
I've done 23 years as an advocate,
Yeah.
and I qualify to apply for the position of Justice of the Supreme Court. But senior counsel ain't my title.
Okay.
That's bestowed upon you by the president upon fulfilling certain conditions and peer review. But there are those who get it automatically by virtue of the offices they hold, the president of the Law Society and the Attorney General.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Then the last you're senior. So.
well, but call me Edgar, political analyst, political risk analyst.
Yeah, interesting. Yes, next to Edgar is Christopher Okidi. Okidi is a Democrat, but also we know that he has interest in areas around constitutional law and governance generally. Chris, thank you for being here.
Yo, it's always a pleasure.
Yeah.
It's my second time actually on this show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Edgar, let me just begin with you. What is our human rights history as a country?
Where do you want me to start?
From the legal framework.
Pre-colonial, the colonial period, and the
post-colonial period. The floor is yours. Just give us our history of human rights.
Let me start with the what many people in my space were taught, that the modern state that Uganda is, or the geographical geographical location that Uganda is, commenced formally in 1901 with enactment, 1902 with the enactment of the Order in Council. Sir Harry Johnson, the first governor for the protectorate called Uganda. Under that Order in Council, a constitutional state was born in the Republic of Uganda. It laid down the broad areas for governance in Uganda. If you were to study British colonial history in Africa, everywhere they went, there were those legal instruments that were enacted to formally declare British dominion over those territories. You remember the Matebeleland Order in Council, that was in Zimbabwe, in Zambia, Kenya, same thing happened. So Article 15 of the 1902 Order in Council gave the broad framework for governance in Uganda, and particularly the law applicable. So the law applicable, there's a law applicable and applied law. Those are two different things. The law applicable is that all the statutes that applied in England up to August the 1st, 1902, when it was enacted in Uganda, applied automatically where? In Uganda. Then that is law applicable. Law applied, the common law would be applied.
Cases.
What do they say? Mutatis mutandis. the Latin maxim that with the necessary modification to suit the conditions of the ground. And there's this leading authority by Lord Denning. I forget the name. It was from Nyasaland. Nyasaland,
Malawi, yeah.
where they were referring to law, that law is like an oak tree.
Like an oak tree.
Yeah, that in the temperate countries it grows under different climatic conditions, and when you produce it in a different environment like it is in tropical Africa, it has to adapt. So he was saying, basically breathing life into that the English law would be applicable, but with the necessary what?
Suited
modifications. And that's why you have, Kajubi Kabalike, Mwenge Migade, where they are modifying customary law and recognition of children born out of wedlock. Because remember, marriage, if you remember Rex and K, I'm giving this rich background to understand the constitutional state that Uganda was, and the post-independence constitutional state, and the frictions we continue to have up to this day. Because I and Sarah, and I believe Chris, are on some particular chat groups. And there is a thinking you see emerging out of people in our generation. And quite frankly, you cringe. And some other times you throw your hands up in air, exasperation, you are like, oh no, we can't have done so much and still remain in one position like you're running on a treadmill, putting in a lot of effort, but you're making progress in terms of distance.
Yeah.
So, children born out of wedlock, recognized in Uganda, yet in the United Kingdom, such would be what? Rude words like, bastard. Customary land is modified, but recognizing the rights of the customary people. So, but throughout the colonial period, because in your introduction you talked about recognition of rights of women, although you didn't mention a very important document, the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, 1995, that was signed in Nairobi.
Yeah.
Signed by Miriam Bote, by the way.
Yeah.
The time when they overthrown, she had gone for that conference in Nairobi, and I don't know, their family is always overthrown when they are abroad for conferences. But so the constitutional state that developed in Uganda, human rights were recognized only to the extent that they served the colonial master. Uganda was an enclave economy, and therefore Uganda was seen as part of extensions of the British Dominion, British Empire, for purposes of furthering their economic interests. So Uganda was commodified, and the law was only promoted to the extent that it would entrench the British colonial interests. So in that period, Africans were only limited to farming. Trade was left with exclusive, laws, statutes. There was a 1933 trade ordinance that limited trading to Indians. And Africans were not supposed to trade within a radius of 5 kilometers. Now, very discriminatory. Very discriminatory. Then also, when it came to enforcement of human rights, first of all, there was this blunt legislation of what they call unlawful organizations. Belonging to unlawful. I know there's an unlawful assembly, but an unlawful organization. Yes. So political parties were not allowed to exist. And the political parties that emerged at the time were mainly trade unions. The farmers' union, the labor union, the teachers' union. Kangave Musazi was a teacher. He was a civil servant. In the evenings, you'd go to address rallies of civil servants.
Yes, and Mothers' Union.
The Mothers' Union. Then the Bataka movement, the first real political party, the Bataka movement, which was a rebellion against the Busuju and Vujolo, that the Busuju and the Vujolo that were not delivering for them. They had been alienated from their customary holdings. And therefore they emerged as a political force. It was actually the first political party in Uganda. Although people wrongly say that it was the DP, or the Uganda National Congress of Kenya. That was the first political party. And these were have-nots rebelling against aristocratic Baganda, the aristocracy in Mengo. But you see friction. And throughout the colonial period, they enact laws like deportation ordinance. Then there's Aliens Act, Aliens Control Act. A foreigner was called an alien. Now it gives you the thinking of the time. And a deportation or things done by the Secretary of State were not challenged in the courts of law. That was what they call an act of state.
I'm thinking about witchcraft ordinance.
Bloody nonsense. I mean, how do you define witchcraft? So, and these blind legislations were meant to curtail, like I told you, an enclave. Now, coming this post-independence Uganda, you remember the frictions, the referendum, the 1966 crisis, the deportation
Of the Kabaka.
he went into exile. There was the deportation of the ministers.
The likes of Abu Mayanja?
No, Abu Mayanja was imprisoned later. There was the deportation of Ivinjira.
Detention without trial.
There's also detention without trial. That was later. There's a deportation ordinance. He was deported to where? To
Karamoja?
Karamoja.
Yes.
So when he flew and they applied in court, they were lucky that they went by they survived on a technicality. They were deported under the law.
A wrong law, yeah.
But it had not been saved in the new constitution. But when they arrived, they were now detained under the Detention Act rather than the deportation. And even Jira is the one who had defended that very law. So on landing at Etebe, is now detained under the Detention Act.
I want to bring in Chris post-independence.
Let him first read.
I'm giving foundation to all this.
Yeah.
So because you are limiting it to the 42 years of the UPDF, and all of us, we are told there's that magical date, the 6th of February, with the attack on Kabamba. They don't mention other attacks. There was a coordinated attack on Rubiri,
yes.
by the Kaira forces. There was another one by Vumbula forces in Impanga Forest, by Roland, Captain now Major Roland Mitali. There was another one in Rwenzori by the Chef Alis. The Uganda National Rescue Front, UNLF and the dictatorship. But of course, 6th of February is what has dominated the discussions. Maybe we take that as the starting date. But the NRA, at that time it was not the NRA. What was it called? Uganda, the Popular Resistance Army. PRA. Incidentally, PRA seems to be a popular acronym amongst these ex-Luwero Bushmen. So, the basis for going to the war, to take on to the bush struggle, was one. The immediate trigger was the so-called rigging of the 1980 election. But more importantly, they wanted to restore the dignity of Ugandans. And that we had been indignified through human rights abuses of the Obote one, the Amin regime, and the immediate post-independent Amin regime. So they went to restore
the
dignity of human beings, the human rights, the sanctity of human rights of Ugandans. And that's what informed men. Even you hear the things that militate in their discussions, all these people you talk to, Dr. Besige, General Muntu, General Tumukunde, General same Muhezi, same things. They call it detentions without trial. They talk of extrajudicial killings, torture and what have you. So I've given this background because it sets, maybe I'm capturing the agenda, but it sets the tone of the discussion that we'll be discussing, particularly in assessing what the UPDF is and what they set out to do and whether they are daring to what they told us they set out to do.
Wow, fair enough. Chris, I want to bring you right there. Yeah. And perhaps you could enable us evaluate the evolution of human rights. Because if you hear Council Edgar, he tells you about things like the NRA went to the bush to fight things like, extrajudicial killings. But today we have rights that have evolved into maybe digital rights, So how have rights in general evolved over time?
Yeah, thank you very much. When I was called for this program, I was wondering, I was saying that did Damian or the organizer see what I was reading? Because until yesterday is when I started reading about Suharto's Indonesia. But the whole of last week I was actually reading 1984. the
George
very
Orwell.
classic apocalypto book by George Orwell.
And more fun.
Yes, so that book 1984, when I was reading 1984, it speaks directly to Uganda, about Uganda, the human rights situation, the state of freedom of speech. Because, for example, in 1984, the Big Brother in George Orwell's 1984, even reached a point where, if it were possible, they would actually do a lobotomy to actually alter people's heads so that they don't do critical thinking against the state and against government. And in Uganda in particular, we've also seen a lot of laws lately trying to curb or confiscate social media dissent, you know. And yet democracy, by the way, the cornerstone of democracy is dissent. That is actually what democracy is. If there is no dissent, there is no democracy.
Pluralism.
So,
Yeah.
so when you hear that there is the Computer Misuse Act, even when there is very clear jurisprudence in this country set by the Supreme Court. I remember when Justice Mulenga talked about even the right to, that actually freedom of speech even includes the right to insult.
To offend.
You
Yes,
see?
the right to
Very
offend
clear.
And,
And by the way, I started following those proceedings since they were starting. When Malema Birizi was at some point taken to inside cells, and then there was the new law year where my uncle himself, the CJ, was actually saying that people should take away politics from court. Then I said, but in a democracy, courts exist as a conflict resolution mechanism. So if you're saying that politics should not be done, political conflict, which should actually be set in courts of law, should be resolved in courts of law. That is why we have constitutional court and all those other courts. Because in a democracy, you are not supposed to go to the bush. When Museveni went to the bush, that was a failure of democracy in 1980. Because that electoral dispute should have actually been handled in court. Because courts exist in a democracy to resolve conflicts. So if a Chief Justice of the country says that take away politics from court, then you're actually saying that people should now people should now go to the bush to actually resolve all this political dispute. And by the way, what should actually worry people is not even taking politics to court. In fact, people should encourage a lot of politics to be taken to court. You see that? But what we should not want.
Professor Oloko Nyango has actually authored a very interesting book about when courts do politics.
Yes, it's actually where I was coming to, because what I was actually saying, that what is not bad, what is bad is actually the politicization of justice. But the judicialization of politics is not a bad thing. You see that? So that tells you, that is supposed to speak to you about the entire freedom of speech landscape in the country. We've also seen a number of civil society organizations also being closed for holding very critical opinion against government. So that is supposed to tell you about the human rights situation in the country. Also, if you were to go to other, if you were to also assess other rights, for example, what rights? Property rights. We hear there's land grabbing all over the place. And you even heard what happened in Kasangati. That was like 3 years ago. So that also tells you. But I don't want to go specifically into taking stock of each of the rights. I want to look at the general philosophy of state. Uganda, even if you elect Besigye as president tomorrow, or even if you elect Mugisha Muntu as president tomorrow, or even if you elect Bobi Wine as president tomorrow, they are not going to do anything much in terms of resolving the human rights problems of the country. Why? Because human rights, the biggest perpetrator of human rights in the country, in Uganda, is the state.
So why do you say they can't do
You
much?
see, is the state. So
The biggest?
the biggest perpetrator of human rights, the abuser of
Abuser.
human rights,
Mm.
is the state.
You know,
And the violence in Uganda is actually called state violence. State violence, because if people are demonstrating on the street, who is the one taking tear gas canisters?
I know I don't have the space yet, but there's a very critical point I want to bring to the fore. And I've seen it missing out of discussions of persons in our space. And I don't blame ourselves. We get carried away by to use your good friend's words, the elitism, the elitism. We tend to dwell so much on the state as being the perpetrators of abuse of human rights. But in South Africa, they explain it very well. There's what they call the vertical state individual, but there's also horizontal, individual to individual. You'll be surprised in the countryside, outside of our space, we the elite, the biggest abusers of human rights are individuals, particularly those ones who have better resources. This land grabbing is not state sponsored. There are individuals within the state who are using their affluence. And many times they're not even state operatives, they are not state actors. You've heard of the big names in the business. Kayung, the people involved in land grabbing are not operatives.
Yeah,
Mr. Okidi, and I'm very sorry if I interrupted, but I thought
it's okay. But
I thought I
was actually coming to that point.
Oh, my deepest apologies.
I had actually.
But you let me, then you let me.
I had just started. There's a reason why. There's a reason why I am doing a structure analysis. Of course, there is an agency, and then there is structure. Why I brought this? I actually brought this very clear, and I said that even if you elected Bobby Wine today as president, Besigye today as president, nothing
the present
matters.
structure.
That is agency. Those are agents. Just you will have just addressed the problem of agency, agency-related human rights violations and problems. But what Uganda wants is what we need is a structural change that supports human rights. You know. Because all these violations are structural violations to human rights. Because, and I thought Edgar, I never expected even Edgar to argue with this point of mine, because I was following what he actually started by the British state. Because what the British state established in Uganda was what we call a constitutional liberal state. It wasn't a constitutional democracy. And these are two distinctions that people need to know. There's a distinction between a constitutional democracy and a constitutional liberalism.
Or a liberal democracy.
Now, constitutional liberalism can be there, is just a facade. It is like democracy. Democracy appears to be there. Like Uganda is a constitutional liberal state, where there is an appearance of democracy. But when you therefore touch the political elite, that is when you realize that there's no constitutionalism. So unless we reform our state, we need to ensure that we move away from this kind of state, which has, and remember the present state, we are still using the software of the colonial state. And why was the colonial state established? One, control, extraction of control, extraction of taxes, you know. If you have that extractive, manipulative state philosophy, it is not going to support freedom. And let me tell you, even if Uganda signs a convention tomorrow on space and human rights, it is never going to implement it because the software doesn't work. Because the laws exist, but laws are like boats.
And to bring inside.
They cannot move if there is no water. And what is that water? It is the spirit of constitutionalism.
Wow, very brilliant. Doctor, because we have so many philosophers here,
I'm not a philosopher.
I am also not
I am forced to quote what the French philosopher Montesquieu said about separation of powers. that because there was arbitrary exercise of powers by the by the monarchies, then there was need to separate these powers. So as 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 you hear Okidi and Edgar speak, how do you evaluate the way the three arms of government have performed? Do you think that the executive, the judiciary, and parliament have done what they ought to do to enforce human rights in this country? In terms of legislation, in terms of enforcement, in terms of interpretation of the law, how are the three arms of government performing in terms of actualizing human rights in this country?
Well, Uganda runs a hybrid system of government. We are not a representative democracy. We are purely presidential, with elements of the three arms of government. So we run more or less a system like the US, except we don't have a Senate. I think the only difference is on the legislative arm, lower house and upper house, which Kenya has done. But we run a presidential system. So you have an overbearing presidency. More than 40 articles in the Constitution. I think precisely 46 articles speak of the president's powers. And even where the framers of the Constitution thought there would be checks on what the president would do, you have a weaker parliament that is only acting as a rubber stamp to the wishes of the president. It has no capacity to function the way that is envisaged in the Constitution. And I think the 11th Parliament is the weakest. So the framers of the Constitution assumed that Parliament would have, the doctrine of separation of powers assumes more or less the same powers for the arms of government. That's why many people, draw that diagram of the three stones with a cooking pot for government to function well. But the stones must be proportional. But in our case, we have a bigger stone.
So you have an imperial presidency.
Yes, you have
an
bigger,
imperial
taller stone with two smaller stones of judiciary and parliament. So our constitution cannot function the way it was envisaged by the framers because of the weaknesses in the legislative arm and the weaknesses of judiciary. The judiciary at the last conference spoke as if they are intending to redeem themselves. But that's a mere intention. I think we also have the weakest judiciary ever since the NRM. 37 years of NRM, we have the weakest parliament with the leadership that is struggling to find their bearing for more than a year.
Are they attempting to find a bearing at all?
I don't know. They could be comfortable where they are operating.
I think they are.
And from under depth.
They
could be comfortable
they are
because they are
slaying.
operating under depth.
They are slaying.
Yeah, and just slaying around town. Now you have recesses that are out of parliamentary calendar. Anytime people feel like going for vacation, they declare recess.
They are going for benchmarking.
So really you have these smaller stones that are getting smaller every other day, which is very unfortunate. So in that case, then you cannot speak of the doctrine of separation of powers, although it's part of our basic structure in our constitution. But it does not exist.
But it's provided for in the constitution,
Yes.
right? I think really today I'll be very overbearing because you sat very far from me. And I appreciate that this time Sarah has let me speak. On previous occasions, it has been a little bit
Not
confrontational, but
not very easy.
I and Sarah
Confrontation is part of debate.
which is okay. No, I and Sarah have a very interesting love relationship. It's on and off.
Yes, Edgar, you have the floor.
But today we're at our best, so I pray it continues to the end. But I think he's brought out a very critical point. You called it philosophical, but it's really
the
practical.
structure-
When you say it's philosophical, you make it abstract. It is real. You put it in a different way. I'd put it in this manner, that as long as the mindset of persons in our space is such that we do not promote the culture of respect for the rule of the law, everything else we we are attempting will be in vain. And how do we develop that culture? One, there should be no negotiation over fundamental human rights. They are not negotiable, they are non-derogable. On that, you cross the line, we should declare war against you. What war do we mean? Not the one of necessarily going to Luwero and firing at Kotagad and what have you, and raiding the armory, like your late friend did, late General Tumini. But we have other ammunition at our disposal. They are the courts of law. When it comes,
there are also small too now.
No, but you see,
Okay, the ideal.
Not even call it ideal. You see, you call it ideal, but the courts of law have come out, even from the time of Dr. Bote, by the way. It's only in the 1970s judiciary was resolved. But you see them in 1980s coming to what is the word? To assert. All these judges, but even just let justice were there.
Yeah, Edgar, maybe I just said the judiciary is at the weakest, meaning it has been doing well.
Yeah, but you see, where has the judiciary gone into this position? Is it because we've allowed that space? Some of these people they appoint, we know that.
It could also be that there is a general democratic recession.
Can I get back my...
Yes. Okay. Let's allow Sarah to make her point.
If institutions are not functioning, then it means the democracy is not functioning.
And not so much even about institutions, which people man the institution. And this has always been my debate with the Sarahs of this world. Deepening civic competence.
But how do you deepen it? We are here to debate that.
Yes, but you see, the space, but
the space to
Edgar,
deepen.
let me tell
Let's
you,
allow Sarah.
there are institutional mechanisms in this country. There are institutional mechanisms. There are laws to bring people to order. There are laws to bring errant judicial officers to order. Who bails the cat? We allow that. You know, we've allowed impunity to reign supreme in Uganda.
Okay, let's allow Sarah
I
to...
have at least seen that Edgar can do one pro bono public interest.
I've done many.
No, I mean,
Can I tell you the people have taken
No, I will
No.
give you one. That's what I'm saying.
With pleasure, with pleasure.
So the point of constitutionalism, the spirit of constitutionalism, I think we need to look at why don't we have a spirit or culture of constitutionalism in this country. There are three elements for constitutionalism to take root. One is the people. Like Article 1 expressly states, power belongs to the people. So once you don't have civic competence by a critical mass, then you cannot hold anybody to account the way the framers of the Constitution envisaged it. The second element of constitutionalism is reference to the Constitution by all actors, political parties, government. I have been in a government office before. Nobody had a copy of the Constitution. How many people, other than lawyers, who read the Constitution for purposes of going to court, how many people know this Constitution of ours? You can count them if you remove the lawyers. Even the lawyers just know where to find the law. How many? Yes. They say a good lawyer should know where to find the law. Let me just first come.
Changes every day.
Let me first
It has
come.
been mutilated so
Yes,
much.
there are three elements of constitutionalism. One is a critical mass of citizens that understand the Constitution and have the ability to protect and defend it. In Uganda, we do not have that. Apart from lawyers who read the Constitution for purposes of arguing matters in court and writing exams in law school, there are very few Ugandans outside the legal fraternity that refer to the Constitution in their day-to-day business. So you need a culture of Ugandans, a critical mass of Ugandans who know the Constitution, who refer to the Constitution, who use it on a day-to-day basis to hold leaders to account.
Yeah.
The second element are the key actors. Actors in government, political actors. Do they understand the Constitution? Do they refer to it on a day-to-day basis? A key example of this is the manner in which some ministers are defending kidnaps or mistaking kidnaps to be arrests. Article 23.
Including the chairperson of the
Human Rights Commission, who thinks kidnaps are arrests. Arrests are clearly defined under Article 23 of the Constitution in a very good detail.
9 clauses of them.
Yes.
On how you effect an
How
arrest.
a citizen can be arrested. So outside that, these are kidnaps, these are abductions, These are illegalities, these are criminals interacting with citizens. The other element of
You are polite. I would use stronger language.
terrorists,
Worse than terrorists.
please use.
Terrorists have usually a political objective, but these ones are basically indignifying citizens. The very reasons that took the present government to the bush. If you parade outside those 9 clauses of Article 23, you're basically subjecting the citizenry to indignified and inhuman treatment. It's sordid and base.
So the third element are the institutions. The institutions that should then be able to uphold the fundamental rights that the citizens and the constitutionalism of the country. These are courts of law, governance institutions like parliament, you know, the Judicial Service Commission, all these institutions that interact and deal with governance, checks and balances. Are they effective? Are they properly constituted? Are the heads of these constitutions competent? Do they have a backbone to say this is the constitution and I am protecting our constitution? In the absence of these 3 elements, then you have no constitutionalism to talk about. And rightly so, the president has on several occasions referred to the constitution as a mere piece of paper because we do not have the 3 elements, and he knows he can abuse the constitution and get away with it, and nobody will call him out to account.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest problem of Uganda. And unless we have these 3 elements, then we shall not be able to effectively monitor, protect, and observe fundamental rights and freedoms of the people. And maybe to conclude this segment of submission, I want to borrow Professor Barria's quote when he said that a community of sheep can only be led by hyenas. And this is what we are experiencing.
Chris, let me get back to you. The basic structure doctrine of our constitution. And I've read an article by Professor Ben Twisungure, something like that. And he argued, yes.
So-called Shokor.
Yes. And he yes, that one. He argued that, you know, when we removed the age limit or the term limit, the entire basic structure of the constitution was altered with. And that we're here discussing human rights, but these human rights cannot be enforced if you don't have tenets that, if you don't have a cap on presidency, for example. So, and that the entire basic structure of our law has been altered with. So, I don't know, do you subscribe to the same school of thought?
First of all, as Okidi Christopher, I think the discussion around the basic structure of Uganda's constitution is also a bit very narrow. Yeah, because when I hear people talk, when people talk about the basic structure of the constitution of Uganda, and they make references, they make small references such as they want to actually peg it onto issues of age of presidency. That one is first of term limits, age of presidency. That one is actually not even a big issue because Biden is a president at 82. Trump is returning to contest at 78, right? So I think those are, for me, I think those should actually not divert us. It is like you're missing the forest. Actually, you're saying you're missing the forest for the trees. You're going for the trees. For me, I thought the discussions about basic structure of Uganda's constitution should be anchored on a more grand vision around political liberalism, around liberalism generally. Because that is actually the structure of Uganda's economy, actually the basic structure of the constitution. Because when they are saying that Sarah has a right to own land, that is already economic liberalism, individual property. That is the philosophy behind it, individual property. When they say, when chapter 9 of the constitution talks about public finance appropriation bill, it is actually telling you,
giving power to the
people. It is actually giving power
to the
people's
people's representatives.
And that is political liberalism. When they are saying that it is only social liberalism in Uganda, which is kind of causing a lot of contestations.
There's a very important article, Article 92, on prohibition of retrospective legislation.
Yes, but you see now, like in Uganda, the contention is around social liberalism because modern human rights looks at human rights to even include gay rights, and you know, and the contention between Africans say that no, for us we are heteronormative, while so homosexuality is kind of a Western. So that is the contention between Africa and the West, which makes social liberalism to be the one lagging behind
If I
in
may
terms of
say-
Uganda. So
Please, can we
looking-
allow Doctor to just give a
okay.
Yes, if I may say one thing in support of Benson, the Professor Benson to Singwiri. I think the element of term limits, and the article was about term limits, not age limit. The element of term limits in regard to the basic structure doctrine in our constitution. If you look at the powers of the president, the constitution creates an imperial president. So the framers of the constitution did not envisage a situation where Uganda would have a permanent presidency. So that's where term limits comes in, because you have an individual exercising too much power in perpetuity. And that's what distorts all the other elements of the constitution.
And that is where some of us have a problem with it. Because if you're tagging the whole discourse of basic structure on these other things, it should be a consciousness. The basic structure of a country, by the way, is the consciousness of the people.
Which is in
That
the
now,
preamble
if
of
you
the
look at the
Constitution.
when you look at the preamble of the Constitution tells you very clear that because of our past history, this is what we
And
want
the
to
need
avoid.
for orderly
Now that
succession.
is the basic structure of the
Yes,
Constitution
and
of
that's
Uganda.
why it's term
So
limits.
the
It comes in.
consciousness of the people then is you can actually read it when you read the entire Constitution from the beginning. Because when they say that power belongs to the people, what are they trying to say? They are giving, they are actually establishing a representative democracy.
If I may just throw in a bit of light here.
No,
just a minute. The preamble.
Just a minute, Edgar. Because what that is supposed to do, what that constitution is supposed to do, like for you in civil society, it is what it does. It creates a social contract, and because of a social contract, rises social accountability. Now that is where the whole question of the civic competence comes in as a big issue.
Let's see what Edgar's
He's summarized what I wanted to say, but maybe I'll put it in a little bit a different language. You know, Mr. Okidi is sounding very philosophical. I'm not surprised you call him a philosopher. I mean, and quite frankly, he's thought-provoking. Thought-provoking, and I like the analysis and I'm drawn to it. So I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm just putting it. Maybe I'm trying to be as clever as he is, and I hope I pass off that way. I'm not clever, I must admit. There are much cleverer people here. But when
and that is a sign of being clever, if you can admit.
Maybe wise, but wisdom comes with age.
That is what Socrates said to the Oracle of Delphi. Maybe I'm not wise because I know I'm not.
So, but really, thanks for the jokes, the compliment. When you go to our constitution, the preamble, sank it on where we've come from, where what we intend to do, and where we intend to go, and creating the social contract, and the wording recalling our history that has been checkered with political instability, wars. We now therefore bequeath, we adopt and bequeath unto ourselves
and
posterity, because we want to create a long-lasting constitutional stability. And where the framers of those,
especially Article 3, Paragraph 3, permanent and durable constitution.
And who were the drafters? Who are the people who crafted those words? Late Brigadier Noble Mayombo, Professor G.W. Kanyehamba, late Justice Mulenga, Professor Nabdero was part of that committee, and Miriam Matembe. Wapakabolo also gave it oversight That was, let's call it the legal and what? And drafting committee.
Yeah.
It had the Ben watchers of this world. By the way, it had people from across the political spectrum. The CS Constituent Assembly.
Until they woke up because of
The wake up was on
269.
Article 269. They
Yeah.
were led by Semogere and Cecilia Gwal. That was over the right to assemble.
Political liberalism.
Liberalism. But, you know, it was a consensus. There was little or no debate over that. Actually, the article, the preamble, if you look at the Hansards of the CA, the preamble, the articles, who doing it? Was it Article 246 on culture and traditional leaders? There was
249.
249. It was, you know, it has been mutilated. It used to be 246. Then see what. There was no debate over that, by the way, and I'll give you the reasons. And many people in the draft constitution, many people had rejected what? Monarchies. But Uganda hurried to crown.
It wasn't Uganda, it was government.
Coronation.
That was,
But remember, there was a petition by Justice Kakulu which was mysteriously withdrawn. Remember the petition challenging coronation of Kabaka Mwenda Mutebi.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was, and it was withdrawn before it was determined. I don't want to personalize some of these things, but there was no debate over that. And you know, there was an article. President Museveni was very, very categorical on the wording of that, of the on cultural and traditional leaders. He added that where the people saw.
Deem fit.
Where the people want or wish. He didn't determine how many people would wish. Then he also in that article permitted the creation of other traditional leaders. That's how the Banyara, the Baruli come up.
That came with the amendment.
No, it was in the original. Actually, when you look at it, these fellows are very much within the law. But why am I emphasizing all of this? He's talking about the cautiousness of a people. There are things that demand bipartisanship, bipartisan unison, bipartisan collaboration, matters of human rights. For we know not when you'll be at the receiving end of the stick. I don't want to mention names. I want to particularize this discussion, but we've seen lawyers serving the state, particularly lawyers holding positions of chiefs or service chiefs of the security forces, director, military intelligence, director, internal security organization, head of the police,
CDF.
I know you want to personalize. I know you want me to mention names, but in particular, the discussion I intend to drive is that we've had these security chiefs or service chiefs giving very threatening statements that do not foster promotion and observance of human rights. We've seen a military general with a master's degree in law raiding the courts.
Yes.
Actually, two of them. One raided the High Court. You remember the Black Mamba tax. Another one raided Machindio Court. And the chief magistrate developed high blood pressure and died soon after that. Late Mafabi, chief magistrate of. Then you have. But what is interesting is that all these fellows, when the tables turned, and they were now at the receiving end of these things, they ran to the courts for enforcement of their human rights. Application for bail. Another one wanted to quit the army.
It's just the culture of impunity.
Exactly. Impunity is the word. The impunity. And persons like we here honestly have to come out of their comfort zones. I mean, I believe people like Sarah here deem me to be an establishment. What do you call us?
Deep state.
Apologist.
Apologist. Muchwezi. That's very primordial. I don't want to ever be associated with that in any manner. Whether
Oh my God.
I don't.
Deep state.
I interact with the members of the district.
I want to bring in Sarah. She has been quiet for some time, but
No, she has not been quiet.
she has been quiet.
The body language was not quiet. The body language. This one I tickled her. She was.
Sarah, as we discuss human rights in general, my focus is drawn to Article 44 and the writ to habeas corpus, the 48-hour rule. How do you evaluate that particular provision of the law vis-a-vis the limitations that we have in terms of investigation?
Article 48 is on non-derogation.
Sorry, 44.
44.
44.
Non-derogation, non-derogable rights.
Yes.
And the right of
Non-derogation,
Yes.
and the mentioned rights of habeas corpus.
Yes.
Then the right of a fair hearing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Torture.
Yes.
Yes.
Torture and degrading.
Yes. So my question is, how possible is it for us to actualize that particular provision, the 48-hour rule, when we have an inefficient investigating machinery, you have an inefficient whatever it is. So is it possible for us to actualize this particular provision of the law when we have an inefficient infrastructure to investigate, to prosecute, and all of these things?
Police is supposed to make use of the criminal justice tools at their disposal. The Constitution presumes that by the time you pronounce arrest, you have investigated the matter. And you are just remaining with final touches, get a statement and get the file sanctioned and go to court. But in the event that you have not investigated the matter well, you are supposed to use tools like bond. Get a person who is suspected of committing a crime, get their statement, but because you need time to investigate, give them bond. Then it gives you time to investigate, even if it's a month.
Because
Let me first finish.
why I ask is, how do you compare that with the mischief of, okay, I know Article, I think 28 talks about the presumption of innocence.
The right of fair hearing, yes.
Yes. But then what if in the unlikely event that this person that you're giving bail is actually a criminal? Sorry, bond or...
A criminal is pronounced by court. Courts of law, not police.
Because
is a suspect, presumption of innocence.
Put yourselves in the hands of a state.
No.
There is evidence that perhaps person X has committed, criminal offense A, B, C, D, but you still have no evidence at point in time. So the fear of letting them go errant and commit more offenses. So do you think the state at some point finds itself between a rock and a hard place?
No.
Just
That's why
okay.
the state has a duty to keep law and order.
Yeah.
When a person, you have a presumption of innocence, every person is presumed innocent until proven guilty by competent courts of law.
Yeah.
So there is no way police can assume that this is a criminal. A criminal is pronounced in court.
That's right.
What you have is a suspect. What you have is a prima facie evidence that they've committed a crime, which if you have not firmed up your investigative means, then you use tools like bond. And a person can spend 1-2 months. There is no limit as to how long somebody can be on bond. But of course, if it becomes unreasonable, then you are abusing the right to liberty of the person you are making move out, in and out of police to report on bond. So to say that a person is at a danger of society, for example, those are cases that involve extreme violence, murder, like people who do bombs and arrest. You have evidence, produce them in court. Even when you have not finished investigation, for the benefit of the viewers, you can have a person charged in court and remanded. As you complete investigations, for capital offenses, the court gives you 6 months to investigate. That's the time in the Constitution, at least. So there is no way you can claim that this person is a danger to society and you cannot follow the law. What we have are rogues in state agencies. We have enough tools to do what you are asking me to do. You have bond, you have bail, you have remand. Criminal justice system has enough tools to enable the state to keep law and order. And there is no virtue in those laws. There is no lacuna in those laws in our criminal justice system. What we have is impunity. What we have are people who don't understand their work. What we have is a state who doesn't respect which doesn't respect the rule of law. That's why we have a crisis in this country. It is not absence of laws. It is not absence of measures. It is not absence of tools to use.
Okay, fair enough.
It's
Chris,
just bad manners.
Chris, I will
Yes.
I will give a chance to add your voice to that. But my
Yeah.
question to you is regarding civil and political rights that Uganda did ratify. All right. So, but then how do you compare that particular right vis-a-vis the way our multi-party dispensation is currently as a country? So, is there any correlation? Are we in conformity with what we ratified?
Okay. I will come to that, but then I also wanted to just supplement on what Sarah said, that police should actually use our criminal justice tools. There is, by the way, a case by Olaro Tunu.
Requiring a statement.
Yes.
The Constitutional Court said it's not a requirement.
Now you can imagine. And then she also alluded that statement.
Was it decided by Justice Chinomujuni?
Yes, 3 of them.
Three of
I
the
think-
justices.
What actually that means?
No, but Chinomujuni
And
was
that-
very critical because Chinomujuni had a very interesting background. He was a chief magistrate, then he became director public prosecutions, then director law development center, before he became a presidential advisor on legal affairs. So he had that
One,
very rich
yeah.
background, and I think he. I read it just for a short time. I didn't
Yeah, but
dwell on
what
it.
actually that means is that the requirement that you should first be arrested before investigation, to
it's
aid in
not
the
there.
investigation, is
You
not
can
there.
go to court and
In
court
fact-
issue criminal
in fact,
summons.
in fact, if that case was actually followed to the letter, we would not even be having this kind of discussion. But it all boils down to her conclusion that there's no rule of law in the country. And I want to also, it reminded me of a statement by Senior Counsel Rwakafuzi. I was at his home last year for dinner, and then he told me, Okidi, rule of law is like the air we breathe.
Yeah.
Without rule of law,
Yeah.
you're just wasting your time about anything else. Yeah. Which I think now brings me to also the question you asked me. International Convention on Civil Political Rights vis-a-vis Uganda's politics and electoral system. One thing is that as Okidi, I think Uganda has tried in terms of establishing a semblance of democracy. That one, at least we must accept. And you know, by the way,
It's work in progress.
yeah, it is
It's
work
not an
in progress.
event.
It is work in progress.
It's not an event.
Yeah, it is not an event. So, as a country, just accepting that let us have some modicum of, or some semblance of institutions of democracy, such as elections. We know, by the way, that in Uganda, elections work. They only don't work in one office, and that is the office of the presidency, which is also deliberately designed. Because the wave of democracy of the 80s and early 90s dictated that if you wanted, even when you're a strong man or you are a military man, you needed to adapt. Like Darwin says, that those who can adapt to change are those who will definitely survive. So when the wave of democracy of the late 80s came into Africa,
It was actually early 90s.
yeah, the late
90,
80s,
91,
yeah, from
92.
89 to
89 was
yeah.
the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Yes, the fall of
Then the
because-
1990,
yes, because the fall of-
1990 the Tiananmen
Tiananmen
Square.
Square, yeah.
Then the 91, the fall of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Now the winds, so-called winds of change started
Yeah.
is it blowing in Africa.
Yeah.
Sorry for cutting you short.
So yeah, so
Some people say there was a change in the blow of the wind, not that the winds.
there was
That's
a
what
change.
there was a change in the blow of the wind, not that the winds
The
of
wind.
change blowing.
Yeah, so by
Interesting.
So you actually see that from that particular period, the fall of Berlin Wall, like Edgar says, or let me say, the defeat of communism in the world brought in a new consciousness of liberal democracy. That if you are supposed to survive, because you know there's an African proverb, by the way, which says that the little wing that does not bend to the direction of the strong wind shall be blown away.
Fall, you break.
Yes, it will fall. So all these military men who had actually acquired power through who had actually just confiscated power, were therefore now told to adapt. Because remember, they needed foreign aid. Remember when President Museveni came? If President Museveni first came with the barter trade philosophy. And what happened to his barter trade philosophy? What Uganda should have traded with Kenya was actually donated to Kenya to collapse Uganda-Kenya barter trade. Now,
It was actually Tanzania.
yeah,
Transformers for ugali.
Yes, for Ugali, yes. I remember. Because I thought it was Ugali, I thought it was Kenya.
No, yeah, Moi remembers wasn't warming up to Museveni during that time. He was very, very suspicious and was ambivalent towards
So the
him.
West had economic tools. The West actually, by the way, the strong men in Africa who switched to the direction of democracy by giving us this kind of hybrid democracy did not do that deliberately. There were a lot of international tools.
Conditionalities attached to
a lot of international tools that were employed. One of them were economic tools.
The structural adjustment programs?
Yes.
But not even then.
No, before that, because
benefiting from for instance, debt cancellation and debt relief, you had to adhere to certain governance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even to access support from World Bank, IMF, you also needed to
governance reforms.
You needed governance reforms. So there were a lot of
and the principle was a lean government.
Yes.
I think the principle per se, in my view, the structure adjustment programs, we review them normally as very terrible for Africa. Of course, there are pros and cons.
Were they good?
No, I'm saying there are pros and cons in every measure. The only element I like about structure adjustment programs is a lean government. Because why do we need now excessive
it was not
reality?
really lean. It was about what are these reforms we initiated after the bubble of 2008? Austerity measures.
Yes.
But not lean, because remember, I don't want to use very rude language, but the bloody structure adjustment policies, they started saying education was not a priority.
No. I said that I have one.
You know why? Because it was the liberalism.
Exactly.
I have
it was supposed to be
one
a
and I remember your uncle Amanya Mushega.
So
Amanya Mushega from Bombay. Mushega, you know, the Honorable Amanya Mushega as Minister of Education. That was the language he adopted. That education is not a priority. That how can even a government start funding higher education? You remember? And they started withdrawing all of these the booms. You remember the 1990. Mao-led demonstrations.
That
was a result. It was neoliberalism. It was our result of SAP.
So
these guys.
I'll give you some.
I'm much obliged. Let me see this place. I'm sorry.
Yeah, because
I'm a little passionate about these things because they affected us terribly.
So, first of all, democracy is a global consciousness. That one we need to agree. And liberal democracy was a consciousness that emerged after the fall of the Berlin Wall. So when you see Uganda, so when we are also assessing Uganda, we should also assess Uganda as part of the global community. Even when the political elite in Uganda may have had some misgivings around the establishment of liberal democracy within Uganda, they had no choice. Because at some point, you first of all look at it even within the first family. Because right now it appears that even within the first family, it seems that it is only Museveni who is a member of NRM. The rest are not.
One of them has said NRM is a reactionary party.
Yes, because that can actually tell you that even
maybe
within...
the wife also is a cabinet member.
I doubt whether she's NRM. But at least me, the one person I am sure, one person I am sure of in the first family who is NRM, at least, is President Museveni. Even Salim Saleh.
So he belongs to a reactionary party.
Because even Salim Saleh, by the way, has been quoted elsewhere saying that,
The wife has
but for us,
run
we fought for
on
this thing.
NRM
Why
ticket
is again Museveni introducing
Rama.
elections? Because Salim Saleh actually said, for us, we had already finished this thing by a war. How then? How? So he doesn't understand how, again, his brother Museveni introduces elections. But remember, it is because of, it was a political, it is a pragmatic political approach for President Museveni to now begin to fall. Remember, he was even given very good names such as the blue-eyed boy of Africa. And remember, let me say, the 1986 NRM, pre-90 NRM, was very idealistic. They had a lot of idealism, liberal democracy, 10-point program. They had still not forgotten. Besides, money, they had not even
root
tested
democracy.
money.
So where you'd have the 1 inch, but even when there was scarcity, the LOCs were the ones who were distributing salt,
Yes.
sugar,
But remember,
oil. You remember this oil under Public Law 480, British cooking oil,
yes,
in the tins, cans.
But remember, all this was because I think they were still very innocent, because like George Bernard Shaw says, power corrupts
and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
So with the passage of time, of course.
So we are now in an era of absolutism. We're in an era of absolutism.
Yes. By the way, President Museveni currently is at his full potential as a dictator.
Yes.
Full potential. He has now reached his full potential as a dictator. He has even become so sophisticated that he plays both the East and the West. Museveni is now in the big,
but I think President Museveni is very mindful.
But that is also
because you have seen him giving edicts.
Edgar, I'll allow you come in later. But you see, President Museveni right now is even now contemplating his own succession. He's now contemplating a dynasty. Now, how then? Because these are the praxis of Uganda, and of course we have the International Convention on Civil Political Rights, which will dictate on how do you change, how you change governments, what should be the benchmark. I'm sure Sarah understands these things even better. What are the benchmarks of what is a free and fair democratic or electoral process? We all know this.
It has been defined by Justice Kanyehamba in
in Kizza Besigye. In Kizza Besigye.
Yeah, and in other instruments like the African Charter.
No, we're talking about the local jurisdiction.
Yeah, but Kidega is telling me to take stock of the ICPR vis-a-vis the local context.
The local context.
Yes. Now, we are saying that the local context has someone who is now contemplating to convert the country into a proper dynasty. That one is very true, because because I am very sure President Museveni loves his son so much, and he would wish the best for his son. But whatever the approach he's doing is definitely a wrong approach.
Does the best mean
what approach is Museveni using?
Sorry?
Does the presidency, there's the best mean a presidency for a child?
No, the best, for me, the best, definitely. If my son becomes president, what would really be the problem? I would be very happy. Father of a whole president. When you look at that particular context, even when we go into elections, do you know NRM spends like 1 trillion to, for example, retain power?
Plus violence.
Yeah, plus violence.
Money
1 trillion plus
enough.
violence.
Yeah, money alone is not enough.
And I'm sure 1 trillion plus violence is not part of the ICPR. 1 million, because you can actually calculate, you can actually get all the figures you can actually track the campaign spendings of NRM. Just you need to know the villages in Uganda and how they take advantage. 30 people, and each receives a specified amount of money. So you have an electoral system where to buy power in Uganda, to purchase power in Uganda, the purchasing cost of power in Uganda is 1 trillion.
then it's likely to increase.
It is likely to increase. So can NUP get 1 trillion to buy that power? Of course, with 1 trillion, NUP can also disorganize NRM. That is a fact, because this is now at least the previous 3 elections in Uganda has shown that NRM is such a juggernaut in terms of finances to overcome. So if you're planning to run for president to take power from Museveni, you need 1 trillion shillings plus violence. With the violence, you can dispense, because I don't think Museveni now has still
Monopoly.
has his high potential over the violence he used to have. Because we also need to know Museveni
How about the army? The army.
Museveni has now aged. No, Uganda's army, by the way, Uganda's army is the first. The
Museveni
army
has reinvented himself.
Museveni,
He's lost
you see,
weight.
the
He looks,
army,
no, he's for a 78-year-old. Eh?
yes, but you see, the army, Uganda's army, by the way, is also being behind Museveni. Is a reality. They can be behind Museveni, but Museveni also does not have monopoly over them. For me, that is my
You know,
disagreement.
all the thing about the facade of the army. Have you, Mr. Okidi?
Edgar,
Just a quick one.
I want to begin with
Just a quick, just a quick
Yeah.
one. Just a quick one. Have you bothered to study the voting patterns of the army?
The lower ranks, of course.
Yes,
vote
the
out.
lower ranks.
The
That is
lower
actually
ranks
why
vote
I'm
out the
saying.
regime, but their commanders are commanded to command
My
violence.
simple question is that have you studied the
Yes.
voting patterns of the army?
Yes, at least
barracks.
I have studied.
NRM losers
That
in
is
barracks.
the reason why.
No further comment.
That is why for me I am actually saying
No
that
further
even
comment.
the army is a facade.
And exactly, and for me,
And
all this talk you hear amongst the elite that's not grounded. You know, that's what they call the grounded theory. You look at certain variables. She likes deploying the word variables. She no longer does so. 6-10 years ago, she used to use the word variables. If you look using grounded theory and you look at the variables of the voting patterns of the army, the barracks and all these gazetted institutions, believe me, what we are talking,
for the army,
it becomes worrisome.
For the army, Museveni has his militia, which is the SFC. That one he has it. That is his militia. He has it. That one we have no debate about it. Museveni has full control of his militia, the SFC. Now, but then I cannot. And by the way, what is the capacity of SFC? I estimate SFC to be in the region of 30,000.
That's the entire army.
No, the entire army of Uganda is
100,000. Yeah.
The entire army of Uganda is 100,000. So if you have Museveni's militia, which is well paid, well salaried, at 30,000, and then you have the other ones who have not got rapid promotions, who are even going hungry, who are sleeping in Mama Ingia Poles. Now that one is the army for Ugandans. You see? So there is 70,000 for you. Uganda has 70,000 army for them, and Museveni has his own 30,000.
So what you're calling a militia?
Uganda,
I don't think it's a
Museveni
militia.
doesn't. So I doubt Museveni actually has the monopoly.
No, he has a command. He has a command that is loyal to his.
As a wrap up, take a short commercial break.
I was being interrupted.
Okay, I'll give you 1 minute because I
I
have to take
thought
a break.
Chris had finished actually, and the time was for Edgar.
Chris.
Edgar, did you donate back your time?
Yes,
Chris.
I did. I said I will see this.
No,
person.
I will come to Edgar after the break. Yes, Chris, wrap it up in a minute.
Okay. So for me, what I am actually saying is that Uganda, by the way, has a chance to take its destiny from the ruling elite and put it in his hands. And I don't want people to actually be discouraged thinking that, you see, you have an army that an army that will stop you. Who thought, for example, that in Libya, that Libya, for example, the army would rise against Gaddafi? What happened in Libya is when people rose, the army went on the side of the people.
In Sudan, the army failed to protect Bashir.
Yes, they went on the side of the people. So 30,000 SFC cannot protect Museveni
And that's
against
on,
48 million Ugandans and
that is on
70,000
the highest
soldiers.
end.
All right,
Because
thank you.
SFC is not
That is
30,000.
a good way to end the first phase of the conversation. Let's take a short
And that is
commercial
why
break.
we need democracy.
Keep with us. Don't move a muscle. We shall be back shortly after this.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create, and publish digital media or to access and use computers, other electronic devices, and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
We'll be back from that short commercial break. Edgar, clearly you have something to say.
What do I have to say?
The comments that you wanted to build on from Chris's point, and also earlier on you are interrupted.
No, there's not really. I was interrupting by way of I was agreeing with Mr. Okidi, and he was mentioning some things that I'm in agreement with, but he says them in a more what would be the word? In a more
candid.
Yeah, he's more candid and more direct, and but he used the word militia in reference to the SFC. I really wouldn't style them as militia. These are trained and funded by the state. They are elite guard of the not NRA anymore, the UPDF. I would rather.
I think militia, in context of their conduct,
It's personal, the personal control, patronage.
You know, when the state is threatened, everywhere I've seen in Africa, the military reacts in a similar way, and more so if you look at the former guerrilla forces that have taken power, have captured power. By the way, in Southern Africa, where they have more mature democracies than we are attempting to build here, the word they use when we took power. When it comes to Uganda, when we captured the power.
yes,
and that is very critical. Eh?
yes.
It shapes.
But Edgar, can I give you information?
Yes.
Why I think I would agree with Okidi that the SFC now is tending to militia. SFC has a command of commandos in their ranks. I think he's a lieutenant colonel. But also under him, they have people they are breeding like animals in the Nebi. No, in the barracks in Nebi and another barracks in Fort Portal. And if you recall very well, during the return of Bobi Wine, after the Arua, violence from the US, there are people who bet up Bobi Wine supporters, and the UPDF said they were Nigerians. Those were they were looking like animalish with beards, with very dark.
It's not the UPDF who said
No.
It was the Minister of State for
Okay,
Defense,
government.
Kano Engola,
Yes.
who in the parliament said no.
Those are the
You said
foreigners.
the pictures
Yes.
that were posted on social media of
Exactly.
Nigerians.
Yes.
But
Those so-called
it wasn't the official
Nigerians.
position of the
Okay, those
UPDF.
so-called Nigerians who bet up Bobi Wine supporters are under SFC command. So why wouldn't you refer to such people as militia?
Edgar, as you build on your point,
Yes.
I would love you to respond to the aspect of because I think Chris and also Doctor earlier on mentioned the aspect of the LGBTQ, and all these are rights that are emerging perhaps from the West. So and they are being globally accepted by some parts of the continent.
Globally,
Okay, gradually being
Well,
accepted.
maybe what
in
you
the
say,
West,
they
gradually.
found themselves to the mainstream debate
All right.
and discourse.
So my question is,
Acceptability is another issue
okay,
altogether.
then my question is, how do African states, or in this case Uganda, how do we strike a balance between the growing momentum of such internationally recognized rights vis-a-vis our African cultures?
Internationally recognized rights, I think, no, I think we are really extending the boundaries very far.
I think because the debate in human rights, it's either universality or relativity.
Relativism.
Yeah.
Relativism.
Yeah, but how do we balance the two? You know, our African values being some way, then there's now this wave of, okay, human rights, LGBT. I don't know, how do we?
You know, the Americans have made it very clear that for them it's about promoting their values, and their aid is tied to their values. But we also know that America catapults when it comes to its interests, and becomes ambivalent when it comes to their so-called values. We saw it in the case of Saudi Arabia. MBM, who's it? The crown prince, the de facto rule of Saudi Arabia, who was linked to taking out what we in Uganda call taking out of action of Khashoggi, the journalist, at their consulate office in Istanbul, Turkey. And when they put it to the attention of the President of the United States, his response was that the information he has that the crown prince was not personally involved in the murder of Khashoggi. I mean, I wonder how far the boundaries can be extended.
Even recently on Ukraine, the missile.
Where
Biden said, no, that was a Ukraine stray missile. Because if it was a Russian missile, it would invoke a NATO rule.
A NATO rule to whatever. Yeah, exactly.
So it's pragmatism.
The debate on the so-called queer people, queer persons, is, for me, is diversionary. We have more critical issues to discuss in Uganda. In particular, one, the rule of law. Rule of law is simply constitutionalism, respect for human rights, constitutionalism, the culture, and in particular checking impunity. I think the biggest quandary we face in contemporary Uganda is impunity. Each and everybody thinks they can do each and anything and get away with it as long as you're politically correct. So you have a border person, very powerless in the pecking order of economic might. But you see the fellow riding dangerously in the wrong direction on a one-way road, one-way street, riding in the opposite direction. Then that's at the border level. Then you have a taxi driver driving a PSV over a pavement, or creating 4 lanes in a 2-lane road. Because he knows nothing will happen to him. You'll have a policeman or an investigative officer who will be compromised to investigate. Even, when we're growing up in this country, I grew up in a fairly exclusive suburb of Kololo. You in the law area, really nasty guys, make no mistake. And there were extrajudicial killings. But a civilian murdering and getting away with it at that time, moreover, we are thin on resources. Investigations would be carried out, and believe me, you would see justice. I mean, the people even Museveni later hanged were sentenced to death by Obote's regime. Kasim Obura was sentenced to death by Justice Odoki when he was a High Court judge. And Museveni elevated him to Court of Appeal, which later became the Supreme Court. So, the impunity. So, impunity is at every level, at individual, at the level of state actors, and at the level of the state itself. So, all these things that you see happening, the ones you're styling militia and what have you, is because we have extended the boundaries. Anything goes as long as you're politically correct. As long as
Can I come in?
I really want to. I want to build this point that I know not. President Museveni is alive today, and you see whenever he's talking, rule of what is it called? The rule of when they're open. Only that this time he sent in a bunch. Opening
The rule of law day.
No, not rule of law. The rule of law
The
day.
conference of
Judges, conference of judges.
The new lawyer.
Opening of the new the lawyer. Whenever he's giving the State of the Nation address, you see him at pains to give directions to the security forces.
Are you saying that he has failed to bring them to order as a commander?
I was building my point.
Okay.
I was building my point. You can hold him to the account, which is very much so. Exactly, and the point I'm making.
He has command responsibility.
The point I'm making, Madam Sarah Bireete, is that I know not of a system anywhere in the world that is self-correcting. Believe me, I know not of a system anywhere in the world that is self-correcting. As long as the persons in our space, like you and myself, comfortably sit with the persons committing, the persons promoting and extending the boundaries of impunity, believe me, it shall come to consume all of us.
I agree.
It will come to consume all of us, whether you want it or not. It's just a matter of what? Time. So it is incumbent upon persons like you and myself, one, to hold the leadership accountable, be it President Museveni, be it his people. Two, the institutional mechanisms and the procedures in Uganda to hold our leaders accountable. Outside of Uganda, torture is a crime of international jurisdiction.
Yes.
You can go and even take out a warrant, an arrest warrant in Germany, especially for those liberal democracies. Even in Africa, we have the liberal democracies. Imagine Kenya, Malawi, Zambia, South Africa. They are extending the boundaries of what? Of these things. So you just arm yourself with arrest warrants. These fellows who commit crimes with impunity, you just wait them as they have gone to visit their clinic.
Like Hussein Habre was taken in Senegal.
Yeah, Senegal. Senegal, Hussein Habre, taken in Senegal. You remember Pinochet?
Yes.
General Agustino Pinochet, the Chilean dictator.
Delegation.
These
guys.
Yes, this lady Kawi.
Yes.
Even General Karachi in Britain.
Yeah.
But Britain,
or should we demand for a special court?
Not necessarily.
Not
That's
necessarily.
not necessarily.
Torture is a crime
Not
against the whole
necessarily.
world.
We have,
Yes.
believe me, we have all tools at our disposal. And I've made it very clear for me when it comes to human rights,
But Edgar,
those are non-negotiable, whichever side of the political divide you are.
so that we don't miss
Chris.
this.
Yeah.
So that we don't miss this, Edgar. In Uganda, by the way, Uganda's human rights situation is even more complex, considering that we have historical atrocities
that
crimes.
have not been.
Yeah, we've never
There's
had
no accountability.
justice for Northern
We have no
Uganda.
accountability
We've
for
had
that.
the Ode Commission report. It has never been acted on. So Uganda actually needs a whole transitional justice mechanism, questions around reparations. It is.
Well, he's talking about the building a national dialogue and consensus building.
For Uganda, we may also need to have a special court that can deal with comprehensive.
Now, if you talk of courts, now you're talking about
issues.
retribution and what is it? Tertiaries.
Yes,
retributive justice. Are you talking about retributive or restorative justice?
No, but I think as a country, we now need a comprehensive legal framework to deal with the past. I think that is what so we can determine then, are we going to go retributive or are we going to go restorative or are we going to have a hybrid of both? I think
he's a person from Acholi, and when he talks like that, by the way, I'm sorry, I'm not compatibilizing him as an Acholi because to box him into a corner. When an Acholi speaks like that, believe me, you gotta listen. When you hear these Maos talking, believe me, they come from a space of
experience and.
Oh my God! There are things I don't want to say on air. But you remember some of the atrocities President Museveni on his own volition at the funeral, either was it of Andrew Adimola or Tiberio Kenyi? Tiberio Kenyi. 2004, he admitted to atrocities committed by the NRA in northern Uganda. You remember? You remember, was it 2004, around that time? 2004, 2014?
And yeah, it is
Okay,
just
colleagues,
Yeah,
recent,
so,
2014.
gentlemen,
yeah, and really,
and we appreciate that, but I want to bring Sarah in so that we don't miss the point that I had that I was trying to lay earlier on. And Sarah, I'm sure you have a comment to make, but on the point of suspension of the United Nations High Commission on Human Rights office here in Kampala, part of the reasons was that Uganda has now established a vibrant civil society that can hold government accountable and can monitor and evaluate human rights issues here in Uganda. You come from the civil society. Are you vibrant enough to hold government accountable on issues of human rights?
I think the right question to ask is that civil society still exists in Uganda.
what do you work for?
No, I'm coming. Why do you think I'm posing the question? What is civil society? So on the letter by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, it's very unfortunate. Very, very unfortunate. And I want to connect from the past debate where we are discussing excesses of NRM regime, excesses of President Museveni's regime, failure of President Museveni as commander-in-chief of the security forces, and the vicarious liability on his head. He might have immunity today. He is the commander-in-chief of security forces that are torturing Ugandans, that are killing Ugandans, that are abusing the rights of Ugandans.
And therefore Museveni is liable to that, for that?
Vicariously liable.
But
in
criminal,
command.
criminal,
No. Vicarious liability is a thought.
thought, yeah, but
Yes.
for criminal whatever.
No. I said he's vicariously liable. Let's be clear. This is the law of thoughts.
Yeah, but
Even under tort, there is assault.
But even under criminal law, if I gave you my car to
There's
drive,
battery
and it has no
But you
like,
know,
road
command
license,
responsibility, the trial of Yugoslavia and the rest.
Yes.
You know how commanders are held accountable
and
for
also-
failure, omission or commission.
Yes, it can even be a joint criminal
Yes, in
enterprise.
under war crimes,
Yeah.
commanders are responsible
Yes.
for war crimes. Because how are you commanding or failing to command?
by the manner in
So
which we bring
why,
it.
yes, that's the manner. We have international tribunals that have adjudicated
Yes,
and
there is,
convicted
there is
commanders.
jurisprudence.
for war crimes, right?
Yes, including the
Yes.
Yugoslavia.
For war crimes.
Yes.
But in
Yes.
case you
No,
are
no,
talking
no,
about
I'm
torture,
coming.
which is an individual offense.
I am talking about the
The
law
law
of thoughts
civic, for
in
example.
our legal common law context as a nation. Vicariously is
Liability
liable under
for
the
a
law of
tort.
thoughts as a commander.
But then you go for the Attorney General, the government of
No,
Uganda, not the president.
I'm coming. He is a commander-in-chief. That title is not a charitable title. He is
It comes with
responsible,
responsibility.
yes, for all the conduct of the security forces in this country. He is responsible, and we cannot take it
that
away.
is called Commander-in-Chief for that
And it's
reason.
a constitutional title.
That's right.
Yes. So it comes with responsibility. So you said that he has been, troubling to explain. He doesn't have to explain.
Yes, he doesn't.
The Constitution expects him to command. So coming before the people to dramatize the abuses of the forces he commands through explanations, through drama and rolling eyes, that's not the Constitution.
So what do you want him to do?
He should command.
Talk as
punish.
tough as you're talking.
Yes,
Yes,
he
he's
should
a-
command, punish, demote, and expel the people in the security forces that are torturing Ugandans. That is his duty. So it is not about coming before the citizens to roll eyes on TV like he does. He is failing. Having said that, the level at which we are, the deterioration of human rights, majority, I think 90% of human rights abuses are by state actors. I know we have individual to individual violations, but torture, kidnaps, detention without trial, trial of civilians in court martial, and other abuses are all by state actors and security agencies in this case. So when you have a situation where Uganda has been under the second phase of the peer review mechanism since June last year to December, before the UN Human Rights Council, we are in a global village, and with technology, you cannot hide any crimes in any country. So the UN Security Council had evidence, and I'm coming to the reason why the office has been closed. Even where the Attorney General who led the delegation
To Geneva.
tried to sugarcoat and dramatize.
But the Attorney General has been very circuit on the issue of...
No, I'm coming. I know there's where he tried to sugarcoat and sanctify, you know, the abuses.
No, Chiriwa Chiwanuka?
We had, maybe for the benefit of the viewers, we had the youth cluster in the Uganda peer review mechanism as Center for Constitutional Governance. We are part of the shadow report for civil society, and we are a member of the steering committee.
And Chiriwa Chiwanuka?
I am coming. So there were two reports. You have a shadow report by non-state actors. You have a government report. There were contradictions, especially on abductions and kidnaps. So you had, even there was a day there were demonstrators at the Human Rights Council in Geneva. People who stormed in and said the Attorney General is telling lies. This is the situation, we've been tortured and the rest. So you cannot say that he was, there are things he could not hide with his hands. But the government report was contradicting the findings on Uganda human rights situation and the recommendations of the state parties.
I'm very sorry. You are making very grave allegations against the person of Chiriwa Chiwanuka.
I am saying the Attorney General headed the delegation.
Yes, and
so it's not the person, it's the office.
Yeah, but how did he sugarcoat?
He was saying things contrary to evidence before the council.
But also, if he had not said anything.
But
let me submit, then you can come in. No, you can come in. I'm telling you, under the peer review mechanism, there is reporting, tier reporting. Tier reporting by concerned members of the international community, reporting by the shadow report by non-state actors, and the report of the government, especially reporting on previous recommendations, since we are going under second peer review in the UPR mechanism. So there were recommendations given to Uganda 2 years ago about human rights by state parties. First reporting was, were they implemented? Were the situations rectified? And instead, the findings are that the situation had gotten worse the way before 2 years ago. And then the state was trying to justify and say, we have no kidnaps, we have no, that's what I'm talking about, if you wanted clarity.
So Honorable Chiriwa Chiwanuka said there were no kidnaps.
Why are you
there was
personalizing?
No, because
I'm talking about the delegation, government of Uganda delegation. Stop making it petty to an individual.
Let me declare my conflict of interest. I happen to know Chiriwa Chiwanuka.
I also know him.
Yeah. And the Chiriwa Chiwanuka I know has been very categorical on issues of human rights and particularly torture.
Does he accept that we have kidnaps in this country?
But even gave directives, even before Parliament, and gave a statement.
Then got his statement at the UN.
So that's why I want you to substantiate.
No, I think you are just buying the news. Let me state
in that case, it was now Uganda, not Chiriwa Chiwanuka.
Yes, and we are talking about the head of delegation. That's why I'm using the office, not the person. My friends were part of this delegation, including the Commissioner, Chris Pekaheru. So it is a government of Uganda delegation, and we are talking about a government report. That's why I'm saying don't personalize it. The delegation was composed of many people, but headed by Attorney General. So let's talk about the office.
So Uganda sugar-coated.
Yes, government of Uganda delegation. Yes, don't personalize it. It was a government of Uganda delegation. As I said, the government of Uganda delegation headed by Attorney General. I did not miss mentioning his name because I don't know him. He's my friend and I know him. But I wanted to leave it at that. He was the head of delegation. He did not go in individual capacity. So we cannot individualize that debate. So when you have these contradictions coming from the UN Human Rights Council, Uganda was again reporting in the 6 months in December, and you wake up in February and you close the Human Rights Office. What message does it send? Rightly said, the host agreement that was initially given to the UN Human Rights Office in Uganda was for 17 years. 2005.
2006, okay.
Yeah, to 2019. And it had expired towards COVID period. The government says that they had renewed it for 2 years.
And even did expand the mandate.
Yeah, expanded the mandate to even establish a regional Great Lakes Training Center for Human Rights Capacity Building and further build the capacity of the commission. So you have negotiations that started within the 2 years. But at that time, the worst coincidence for me is that we have an increasing rate of deteriorating human rights. From 2019, you have 2020, the elections that came with the Kampala killings, where there is no accountability whatsoever. The government said 54 were murdered, but the people say more than 100. And you have no accountability, you have no punishment, you have nothing. And these are security forces. You have the elections that degenerated into kidnaps. And at the time, the front runner for the presidential elections, Honorable Chagulanyi, was sending a petition to this very office that has been closed. Then we had the beating of the media that covered the presentation of the petition in the UN complex. That was an assault on a global office of the UN. So you have all this build-up. Media was battered during elections. We saw them being beaten in Masaka. We saw them, every presidential candidate was disrupted, except Tenarium. Genome Shamuntu, who is normally regarded as peaceful, 46 of his rallies were disrupted by the army and they never took place. The FDC candidate was arrested 43 times that we documented. So you had this
Even nominated without shoes.
Yes, turbulent election. So you have a build-up of this.
Covered in dust.
Yes, and we are still resolving the questions of kidnaps. The parliament is still debating the violations of human rights. So you are coming from this background as a country, and then you close the office and you say, we have enough capacity. Where is evidence of that capacity? Can we match actions of government with their words? Or it's just cheap talk?
Chris,
Yes.
still on the issue of closure of this particular office, but also Sarah brings in the aspect of security forces. UPDF celebrates 42 years this particular year. And if you listen to the president, he said, and he warned, he said that security forces, for as long as you go ahead to brutalize citizens, for as long as you're corrupt, the citizens are going to detest you. I don't know, is this the president talking firm and saying that the security forces must not do what they have been accused of doing? So how do you evaluate UPDF at 42 vis-a-vis the closure of this particular human rights agency?
Yeah, first of all, I don't want to go into the nitty-gritty of the letter. I just want to look at the bigger picture of everything. That it is, first of all, very unfortunate that such a letter would come from a high-ranking government official, closing, first of all, an agency which we are even part of. Now, you see, the issue here is we are part of the United Nations. We are part of a global consciousness. In fact, human rights is a global norm. This is a global civilization.
The air we breathe.
Yes, it is actually the air we breathe. And you know, the San Francisco spirit was actually a global consciousness that we now need to transition away from an illiberal world where we were killing each other. We even went into wars.
2 wars.
Yeah, into 2 wars. So that all this can be addressed if we have an institution that is in charge of global peace. And peace and human rights. By the way, human rights is part of peace. You see, you can't achieve it without
Chris, are you saying that the...
So what we are trying...
Just a follow-up. Are you saying that the United Nations is a guarantor of global peace?
Yes.
It's a mechanism. It's a mechanism.
Yes,
It's a mechanism.
It's a global mechanism
Okay.
for global peace and human rights.
Because someone one time said that what is keeping the world at peace is because there is a nuclear weapon, one facing Washington, then the other facing Moscow.
And why those weapons? And why those weapons have not been the trigger has not been pulled from those directions they are facing. It's because
the UN,
United
National Security Council, with the permanent members.
So the UN was a global consciousness. It was a quest for global civilization, that human norms, human rights have to be respected.
That began from League of
and
Nations.
if you actually suspend such an institution, you're actually suspending civilization. You see that? That is how we should look at it. It is actually a suspension of global civilization. In fact, Uganda is actually saying that we are no longer part of global civilization, which is very unfortunate if a world minister can say that. But you see, why that comes is because of the nature of people we appoint in public offices who are incompetent, cannot have this broad range of perspectives, cannot evaluate, understand, and see how to play their diplomacy within within this multilateral or global context. So I think that is, first of all, very unfortunate. Also, when you say that because we have now developed a civil society, Uganda has never had a civil society.
That is not me saying. That is
Yes.
what the letter
It's
is
the,
saying.
the,
Yeah.
the letter
No,
says.
the letter says. But you see, Uganda has never had a civil society. You see, because a civil society. Anyway, maybe it would also be wrong to say that Uganda has never had a civil society, but Uganda has never developed its full civil society potential. What we look at as civil society in Uganda
NGOs.
are NGOs.
Civil
But civil
society,
society is broader.
broader.
Is broader than
Farmers
that.
unions.
Yes, it is actually
labor
broader than
unions.
that. So the question then is, how can a farmer in a cooperative society in his community hold government accountable? You see, do they have that capacity? So the church, for example, is also part of the civil society, because the civil society is occupies that space outside of government and the market. You see that? So Uganda civil society, Uganda first of all even needs to build its full potential of civil society.
Civic
capacity.
competence, civic
Yes.
competence.
So to say that you're now expelling an agency because we have now developed a civil society, I think
It's laughable.
I think that is, first of all, a myopic conception of what civil society is. Now, coming to
The UPDF.
To the UPDF.
Vis-a-vis human rights.
Yes, UPDF, first of all, UPDF has transitioned. I think I don't have time to go into that transition. But UPDF has transitioned. First, from Edgar talked about PRA, because Uganda's military software is actually, in fact, Uganda, currently we are running on, like I said earlier on, Museveni has his militia of 30,000 soldiers.
He's loyalist.
Yeah, he's loyalist. And then Ugandans have 70,000. So Uganda's military arrangement is actually an alliance between Uganda and Museveni. What we call the UPDF is an alliance between Ugandans and Museveni. Now, one is Museveni. By the way, Museveni has succeeded in Uganda in terms of peace and security. That would mean I can say, compared to other presidents, I think his security arrangement or his security him in terms of guaranteeing security has been better than Amin, than Binaisa, or than those other people. But what Museveni has actually failed is building a trans-regime army, because the army, for 36 years, we are still talking about Museveni's army. And he has even several times referred to the army as his army.
My army, my oil, my country.
Yes. And the reason why...
Well, he has even gone,
yes,
he has gone further than what you're saying. He
But
says,
Chris, I thought you had demystified that by saying that 70,000 of
he
this
says, you
army
touch
is
my army, you'll end up what? You remember? 6 what?
6 feet.
6 feet.
Under.
Yes. And
Very
his
strange
son,
statement.
and by the way, to even now confirm this further, his son even now calls the army as his army. Meaning, actually, the army is a family entitlement.
Allegedly.
Yes, the army is a family entitlement. So, Museveni has failed in terms of building a trans-regime army. That there is a lot, even when Museveni leaves, there is a lot that needs to be done in terms of making UPDF transition. When we talk about Uganda's transition, it should be a composite transition. The transition to have an army that has for long been used to a personality, a strong personality, to an army that can now serve the state. Now, if you
An
had
army
that
that can actually
trans-regime,
salute a
Yes.
commander-in-chief
yes.
elected by the
Yeah.
people,
Now, if
irrespective.
you had
When
that army,
General Ivan Koleta said that, he was put on Katebe.
now when you
You mean I'm going to be put on Katebe?
if you have an army with such orientation, an army with an orientation that we are the state, a national army, we are not anybody's individual army, that army is definitely going to respect state institutions. You're never going to hear UPDF and its black mamba escapades in the High Court. You're not going to hear about UPDF because you have an army which is oriented towards state protection, not regime protection, which is what the UPDF is
an army
saying.
that is answerable to
Yes.
civilian authority.
Yes,
Yes.
Edgar.
That is elected by the what?
Yes,
By
yes.
the populace.
In
Edgar,
fact, by the way,
the
there
issue
are
of,
two
UPDF
books.
at
There,
Potato.
actually, there are two books I always like to refer to when we are discussing the army and the state. Huntington, the Harvard professor, the soldier and the state. And Huntington actually says that an army in any democratic society must submit itself to the democratic control of the state, because the policy of war is politics. It is only the strategies and the operational details.
Actually,
of war.
the
strategy.
there is
which
case
is for
law.
the military.
There's case
Yes,
law.
which is for the military.
There's case law emerging
Yes,
out of the
yes.
Philippines.
Mm.
Philippines.
Uh,
When President Arroyo, Gloria Arroyo,
Yes.
cited, she put a state of emergency and cited a brigadier general for what she declared martial law in a certain area and cited a brigadier general, I think Makagpal, for not taking instructions from the president and commander-in-chief. It discusses the role of the military in a democratic dispensation.
Yes.
It's a very important case, and it also quotes authority from South Africa. In South Africa, I think the trial of the general who didn't take orders was his identity was hidden, so it's called the legal soldier, and brings out all these the role of the military in a democratic and dispensation. And being answerable to the civilian authority. These are very important things I'm bringing to the attention of our viewers. More so, 10 or so years ago, Uganda's cases, constitutional law cases, were being cited in some of these jurisdictions. South Africa, Philippines, Hong Kong. There used to be a digest. You remember Commonwealth Human Rights Law Digest? There would be those summaries, and you'd see authorities from Uganda being cited in other jurisdictions because they give a summary of the case, the issues, the holding, and cases cited. Now you read some of these digests, you hardly come across any Ugandan case that is being cited in those places.
Meaning there's a recession also.
Well, I don't know, because when the 1995 Constitution was enacted, it was really, it was such a landmark in Uganda's constitutional history, in Uganda's constitutionalism. I remember Kenya, the present constitution that was drawn 2010, the what they call it, Wanjiku, the common person's constitution. Uganda's expert professors, same paper, went there as technical advisors to the Kenyan constitution. Now, when Dr. William Mutunga cited Uganda's decisions in their election petition, my God, the Mullah Abdullahi,
Nasiri,
Jesus, Makao Mutua, they read and referred to Dr. William Mutunga in the most unprintable terms.
Yeah.
That
Paul Mwite.
No, Paul Mwite was he didn't. Paul Mwite was cancelled. Now he was good, but Makao Mutua was not cancelled. But he was saying that how can Dr. Mutunga cite case law from Uganda. And I cringed. But honestly speaking, me, that was a low moment because we had set a standard for these people. Now, I don't know what
Which
went
we
wrong.
went against.
Yeah, we.
And I don't know at what point we dropped the ball. I don't know.
Colleagues, our time is
I
fast
don't know at what point
Yeah.
we dropped the ball because he talked about the absence of civil society in Uganda.
Yeah.
And I'd like to agree with him. If you compare Uganda to a country like Kenya, these constitutional reforms you see in Kenya, she was an observer for this last election. She was there, maybe, I don't know, did you also participate in the fist fights of Wanyonyi, Wafula, Chibukati with his fellow commissioners? But
No, I have never gone physical in my life. I don't believe
well, I hope you don't ever. But the jokes aside, the fact that Chibukati would have the confidence, even after such an economous last-minute meeting where they had to tally and now go to declare a winner, the reason why he had the comfort and the confidence to go and pronounce, unlike late what is the other guy, the
Chivic.
Kivitu, Steve Kivitu, Kivitu. For him, he even don't know who had won.
Yeah.
They just gave him, he grabbed the briefcase.
Because he didn't receive results. So he said, I don't know what's won.
You know, he said
I
for
sent
me,
the plane, it has disappeared. I have sent what?
You see, but
What do I announce?
exactly.
He
But you
was,
see the mechanism, all those things we saw in Kenya.
But Chibaki's wife wanted Chibaki announced. So whether there was
You
results
see,
or not.
now the point I'm making was that the constitutional dispensation we see in Kenya is a result of deliberate, intentional, and willful participation of the civil society, holding their leaders accountable. Deepened civic competence. In the absence of deepened civic competence, we are going to have authoritarianism and impunity reign supreme in the Republic of
let me
Uganda.
just say,
Yeah,
out-
sure.
for fairness,
As you
of-
give us
of
your
NGOs.
last words as well.
Yes.
Yeah. And I'll-
I want to underscore the fact that the conditions prevailing in Uganda today cannot enable a vibrant civil society. What are these conditions? You have one, the nature of legislation against NGOs, the administrative burdens. Just this year, we have spent 1.5 months. Since January, we are just doing compliance to 8 institutions.
Kenya had similar
No,
conditions.
I'm coming in. You will have your word because we are concluding. Let's not interrupt. It's good I'm going before you, then you will respond. You have that opportunity. So we've spent the whole of January, part of February, just complying. 8 institutions before you go to the NGO bureau. And you cannot go to NGO bureau without finishing the others. So that's burdensome. Like you have all staff working on compliance and no other work. Beyond that, the MOUs with districts. You go to the district, introduce yourself, sign an MOU. On top of national licensing, by dual licensing, by the URSB and the NGO Bureau. I have 3 certificates for registration to operate as an NGO. Away from that, you have the financing, shrinking financing base. After the suspension and closure of DGF by government, 80% of support, financial support for civil society sector has gone with DGF. So we are all working 20%. You have a situation of now intimidation, general intimidation of the citizenry. How many people can you invite for this debate in Uganda today? We don't have 1%.
You mean you're intimidated?
I am coming. We don't have 1% of Ugandans that are able to engage in political debates. I'm not saying myself, I'm not. Of course, I'm not. I'm saying we do not have.
But I'm here.
Yes, you're part of the 1%. I'm talking of people not here. I'm not talking of people in the room. How many people do you invite for political debates and they come?
They fear.
Of course. Whether their fears are founded or not, that's another issue. We know that under the strategies of war, inflicting fear within the population, self-censure and get scared wherever they are, is strategy number 3. And it's the maximum as you inflict war on governance. That's where we are. People are scared, even when they have nobody following them. Some have been followed, truly. Some have been abducted. Some have been arrested. So this is the prevailing environment.
When did it start?
But you have the likes of Kakwenza, your friend. Let's just go with that. Let's look at arrests. You can talk of Nicholas Opio. Where is he now? You can talk of actors in civil society. During elections, 28 CSO actors were arrested observing elections for which they were accredited to. Spent 3 nights in jail without even police bond, beyond 48 hours, for observing elections they are accredited to observe. Reported police for 6 months. They could not even produce reports of the preliminary work they did to observe elections. 50 organizations closed after elections without due process. Before that, since 2011, you have break-ins of NGO offices. A total of 42 NGO governance offices were broken into. Yes, without a single report, even where offices had CCTV cameras and CCTV footage showing people who broke into. There is no single police report, no arrest.
Were they hooligans? Were they goons?
Exactly.
What? I mean, you say you have the CCTV.
Yes, and police has this CCTV footage.
Yeah, but you were unable to establish who they are?
I am not a security person. Okay. Yes. So you have this condition of NGOs. NGOs are a small sector of civil society. You have media as a second sector of civil society. Look at the clampdown on media. Big television stations in this country are operating with temporary licenses. Why temporary license? So that it's easier to revoke and there's no redress. You have the media, the editorial control of the media. You have the political editors who used to be arrested, removed from jobs by then Mutavazi, who was heading UCC. The crisis in media industry and the clampdown. You have clampdown on social media with bogus laws, like the Computer Misuse Amendment Act.
But it was declared, Section 25 was
the old one was declared. The amendment, we are still challenging it. The amendment of 2022 has not been declared null and void. I'm part of the petitioners. Sections 23 of the old was declared null and void, but we have the Nsereko law, bogus, that we are still challenging in courts of land. People are being arrested. You saw recently the Civil Aviation Authority saying you don't take pictures here, you don't, and they are quoting the Nsereko bogus law. So you have this civic space context in this country. How do you expect a vibrant civil society to emerge? Look at academia. You cannot hold these debates in Makere anymore, can you? I've been there twice and bounced.
Are students are no longer interested?
No, the administration, the council, Madam Rona, does not allow political debates in Makere. I've been there twice as a panelist. And debates are closed. You are a student, yes.
It's as good as burning.
Of course. So what are we talking about?
People now agree that Uganda is 1985.
Yes. So what are we talking about? So the reasons given by the Minister of Foreign Affairs in closing the UN Human Rights Office in Uganda are bogus, null and void.
Edgar, your last words.
You both speak Luo.
Me and him?
Yes.
Yes.
Speak a dialect of Luo called Acholi. Amongst your people is a folk tale of Obibi. You know Obibi?
Yeah. Yes.
Obibi is an ogre that goes to suck blood out of. It's a story that is told amongst at the fireplace amongst Acholi people and Lango people. Basically to instill some bit of fear in the kid that the night when darkness falls, there's Obibi to suck blood out of you and you'll die. So the children are.
In fact, there's even another one that was created called a Jogadi.
So Obibi is meant to instill fear in the children that they should respect the night and a God sleep. I think we are at a stage.
Jogadi is for during the day.
For during the day, Obibi is for the night. So I think I really like to bring it in context that as long as persons in our space, remember you labeled me deep state, whatever that means.
No, it was a joke.
It was a joke, I hope so.
It, yeah.
But I know what you meant, that maybe I'm aligned to President Museveni. I don't hide my admiration for him, and maybe I'm certainly not ambivalent towards him, but I'm also not, I don't pander. I don't pander to President Museveni. And quite frankly, when it comes to the space of fundamental human rights, I'm uncompromising. And I'm agreed with many of you, whichever side of the political divide we fall, when it comes to fundamental human rights, there should be no two ways about it. Because you know not when yourself will be on the receiving end of things. And I gave examples of security chiefs where lawyers and were invoking, all these excesses. But when their turn came, they went to the courts to enforce their laws, bail. Another one wanted to be not to be tried by the court martial. Then another one wanted to be ruled as having retired from the army. And another one that being hosted on a political talk show was a fundamental human right. He didn't, those kinds of things. So, in relation to OBB, for so long as the persons in our space do not hold our leaders to account, and I've said there are many mechanisms, locally and internationally, as long as we do not hold our leaders to account, impunity and authoritarianism is going to turn into an OBB that we shall all be fearing. That OBB is hovering around us, and we shall be like those little kids growing up in Acholi and Lango communities where that folk tale has been told to them. So we shall be subject to an OBB, and every time shall be fearful.
Oh,
Yeah,
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Chris Okidi.
Your last words.
yeah, for me, my last words are that, first of all, we need a national... By the way, Uganda needs to just work on a national soul. You see that? Because the dysfunction of this country is just bad manners. We are just bad-mannered people. Even when you find a border on the road, he's not respecting the law. Respecting rule of law in a traffic context is respecting the road safety, the Traffic and Road Safety Act. So, as Ugandans, we need, I think it was the president of there's a hack club, Vakal Hack Club was president of
Czech Republic, eh?
Yes, Czech Republic. For him, he said that, you see, what is happening in Czech Republic is that people are looking for very complex solutions and yet the whole problem is so basic. It is such as getting what is the national soul. So if the national soul of Uganda can be that one, if you, like Edgar earlier on said, you violate anybody's human rights.
And you have nowhere to hide.
That one, cancel culture.
It, yeah.
We can even have like a cancel culture and say, this one here is a human rights abuser. He should never qualify for any government
public
And don't attend
Any-
social gatherings.
Ostracizing
even in the bar, he should not be allowed to have a
Yes,
beer
have
in the
a
bar
seat,
because people who go to the bar
That should be allowed.
are people who have done very good
ostracize
work.
them, ostracize them, avoid them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, something like a cancel culture. You see? So that it is in the consciousness of every Ugandan. That you see, me, I don't sit with people who violate human rights.
Yes.
Me, I do not sit with
I
people.
can't attend your functions.
I can't attend functions.
That was part of Black Monday campaign.
Yes, those are the kind of things that we need to do. And then also we need to resuscitate civic engagement. And civil society, by the way, Sarah,
NGOs.
is
Civil
not
society
only
is broader.
NGOs.
Okay.
Yes, of course.
I come from the
by the way,
minority sector of NGOs.
I know many people actually, ever since Mao became Minister of Justice, many people now begin to wonder what is Okidi's opinion, because people think Okidi is no but Mao. But I remember there was a time I was actually talking with Mao on phone.
When he was minister.
Yes, when he was already minister. And we were talking about the civic space. And this is what I told him. I said, by the way, in Uganda, there may also be, it is true that there is a shrinking civic space because of high-handedness of government. but there's also lack of civic innovation on the part of civil society players. Because remember, this context also changes. Now you're dealing with an economy that is no longer agrarian. So are you still going to use the same NGO agrarian means in villages to achieve in this context of the 4th industrial revolution? We are even going to the 5th industrial revolution soon. So I think also,
So what
even
methods do they use?
when civil society complains that there is no civic space, do they have the civic innovation?
Like
me,
Civic Space
me,
TV?
me, let me tell you, I was, for example, let me tell
Okidi,
you.
you are saying that
I
on
know,
Civic Space
I know.
TV.
I
This
know,
is an
I'm saying that on
innovation.
Civic. Yeah, this is an
Yes.
innovation. Maybe you're also the 1%. Maybe you're also
No,
the 1%.
but it reaches a wider
which is
audience because
our
this,
time
this is not regulated by the UCC.
It is.
It
You have a
is.
license.
Yeah, but
Okidi, we have to be out of
Why?
here. So
hey, yeah,
Yeah.
but for me, actually, my last word is that
Why?
Uganda, I think all of us actually need to save this country because this country is in a boiling. This country is in a boiling situation,
You're putting it very mildly.
and all
We,
of us
we are seated.
we need to leave our comfort. We are going to be intimidated. We are going to do
Yes.
everything. But what built Kenyan democracy? And if Godba was here,
Resilience.
if Godba was here,
Resilience.
the intelligentsia.
Thank you very much.
You
that has
cannot-
always been my
your
argument.
Yeah,
That was
intelligentsia.
intelligentsia.
You
And we
cannot-
have abdicated
you cannot
our
build-
responsibilities.
You cannot build Uganda when it is full figure who is addressing you, who is analyzing your politics. The intelligentsia in Uganda needs to
I agree
turn
with the
back.
elite in
You need the
Kenya.
tomboys.
Turn back.
The intelligentsia are the ones who
Yes.
set the agenda.
Yes.
And to that extent,
And
we
then
have
also-
failed in that responsibility.
Yeah.
We have
That's why
abdicated
Besigye
it.
has said, the
We have
elite.
abdicated it.
Yes.
And the worst-
So actually in Uganda, we even call our elite lumpen elite. You know, lumpens are supposed to be lumpen proletariat. But in Uganda, we now have the lumpen elite. because
They call us
even
hooligan.
They are
hooligan.
not doing anything
Okay.
to save their country. Yeah.
thank you very much. Hope we can have more of the likes of Tom Mboya in our
Yes.
political dispensation. But of course, thank you, Comrade Okidi.
Oh, Tom Mboya,
Thank you.
there was Ken Matiba,
Ken Matiba.
Paul
Robert
Mwite,
So
Robert
many.
Ouko, there was Gigi Kariuki,
Malwa.
They had
Oginga.
the critical mass.
They had
Yes.
Martha Karua,
The Oginga.
Charity.
Charity.
Dr.
Ngilu.
Wile Mutunga,
Eh,
Professor
Saitoti.
Munkangi.
Saitoti.
They had
That
the critical mass.
was a professor of
Then
mathematics.
Wangari
Wangari
Maathai.
Maathai was
Yes.
addressed.
The
Remember
list-
saving
Intelligentsia.
Karua Forest?
Yes.
Yes, they were part of...
The critical mass.
The list is
of
endless,
intelligentsia.
clearly. But thank you, Comrade
And the likes
Okidi.
of
Thank you,
William
thank you,
Ruto.
Council Tabaro. Thank
A
you,
pleasure,
Doctor,
absolute pleasure.
for sparing the
Absolute
time
pleasure.
to give our viewers this very amazing content. Have a lovely Friday. I don't want to add water into what has just been said, but just rather wish you a lovely Friday.
can
But
light
also
fire.
remind you, but also remind you to subscribe to this show on YouTube and follow us. See you next week, same time, same place. Bye bye.